I shall show you all the dailies. I will not give up. Fantastic. There we go. Hard questions. Was it a ploy within the DP circles to achieve a selfish end, or was it a case of loyalists who did think through the repercussions of their actions? Whichever way it goes, the mess at the DP's door will do more damage than good. This story continues on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation today. Also, dams audit closes in on top officials. The Auditor General has completed a special investigation of the 16 billion shillings Aror and Kimwarer dams, and a damning case against senior government officials is in the final stages. Now, the big question is whether there is political appetite to take the powerful individuals to court. This story continues on page 9 of the Daily Nation this morning. Also, Tom Mboya, 50 years later, on July the 5th, 1969, Mboya stepped out of a pharmacy in Nairobi straight into a gunman who fired 2 bullets into him. He died within the hour. Tomorrow in the Daily Nation, a special report and book serialization. Do not miss your copy. That is on page 8 of the Daily Nation. Just get a snippet of what that book serialization is all about on page 8 of today's Daily Nation. Right. Also, life in jail for Garissa terrorist. Tanzania found on campus on day of attack. Tanzanian found on campus on day of attack to spend the rest of his life in prison, as 2 others handed 41 years each. That is also on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a quick look also on what is on the front page of the Standard, and this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the Standard this morning. It's holding this splash for us. The Standard is loading. Hope it won't act on me. And there we go. Detectives stress fake letter to DP's office. That is what we have as a splash this morning. Detectives stress fake letter to DP's office this morning. Chronology of events. June 28th, FBI briefs DCI on cyber cafe from where a letter was put online. Then July the 2nd, police received preliminary report that shows letter was fake. July the 2nd, blogger identified as Sam arrested in city center at 6 p.m. And Dennis Itumbi arrested inside restaurant opposite City Hall at 1 p.m. That is yesterday. Itumbi moved to DCI headquarters and thereafter Muthaiga police station. You have this story well covered for you on page 6 of the Standard this morning. Also, Uhuru grand plan to boost local firms, create jobs. This is all about transforming Kenya. President outlines his government's measures to promote local manufacturing firms as part of his legacy. Also, life 41-year jail terms for Garissa varsity terrorists who killed 148 people, mostly students at Garissa University College in 2015, slapped with long prison sentences by a Nairobi court. That is also on the front page of the Standard, and the story continues on page 9 of the Standard this morning. The Star up next, and this is your splash today. Cops extorted 300 million shillings from recruits. That is what we have today. College bosses illegally deducted cash from freshers' allowances. The story continues on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. Edward Ouko says deductions were irregular and criminal. This was an audit. Also still on the front page of the Star, Nairobi MCAs disrupt county assembly. And you can see what they were doing yesterday, lying every which way on the floor of the house. Leaders behaving badly. And let's see what the caption reads. It says, you tax dollars at WO. Well, I can decipher that. Nairobi Servant Leaders MCA disrupt yesterday's plenary session demanding release of bursary funds. This is how they were acting. That is on the front page of the Star this morning. Also, Ruto death plot, Itumbi to be charged is another story that you can follow on page 6 of the Star this morning. And there is a breakthrough. Researchers eliminate HIV from DNA of mice in step towards cure. You can follow the story on page 6 of the Star today. Let's see what we have on the front page of the People Daily. And this is your splash today. Itumbi arrests. Spotlight now turns on Ruto. Police want to know whether DP was aware of fake letter at center of assassination claims. And this story continues on page 6 of the People Daily this morning. Also give us time to decide on grade 6 tests, says Magoha. Minister assures that 26-member team will give green light on whether pupils will sit national exams. This story continues on page 2 of the People Daily this morning. Also, MP's Senate supremacy war renewed. Duale asks CS to ignore senators' summons, but Upper House says it acts within the law. This story continues on page 5 of the People Daily this morning. Let's see what Taifa Leo is holding for us today. And there we go. Itumbi anaswa kuhusu njama ya kuua Ruto is a splash. Mtaalamu wa dijitali katika ofisi ya naibu rais ndani kuhusiana na barua iliyodai mpango wa mauaji. The story continues on page 2 of the Taifa Leo this morning. Also, wabunge wajadili kuvunja seneti. There's another story there. Vita vya ubabe, it says, baina ya bunge la taifa na seneti kuhusu lipi lina mamlaka zaidi viliendelea bungeni jana, huku baadhi ya wabunge wakipendekeza seneti ivunjwe. This story continues on page 2 of Taifa Leo today. Also, aibu Kakamega, wanafunzi wasomea chini ya miti wapi CDF County? That is a probing question. This is happening in Kakamega County, and that is on the front page of Taifa Leo this morning. Let's buckle down to business. Remember, today is In the Market, and we focus on all matters business. Former MP caught up in 1.2 billion shillings inheritance row. That is what is on the front page of the Business Daily. Ex-State legislator fights with brother and developer of a posh Kitisuru estate. The family of former Tetu MP James Ndungu Githenji is locked in a court dispute over 1.2 billion shillings property located in Nairobi's high-end Kitisuru estate. Mr. Githenji, who has defied both with his brother and developers of multi-million shilling houses over the management of his late father's estate, was yesterday charged with breach of peace after allegedly interfering with renovation of the posh homes. The former MP, who was released on 50,000 shillings or 50,000 cash bail, told the court that the criminal case stems from a heavily contested civil litigation over the control and management of 60 palatial houses that he put up in Nairobi's Kitisuru suburb, a high-end neighborhood. You can follow the story on page 4 of today's Business Daily. Also, still on the front page of the Business Daily this morning, Uhuru order on payment of bills spurs new jobs. That is another story. There is also the Purchasing Managers Index here that shows you how this has reacted. The economy generated new jobs at the fastest pace in 2.5 years last month, as payment to state contractors eased cash flow for private sector firms. Companies surveyed in the monthly market Stanbic Bank Kenya's Purchasing Managers Index, that is PMI, reported increased hires last month, attributed to President Uhuru Kenyatta's directive requiring state agencies to make quick settlement of pending bills in his June 1st Madaraka address to the public. The survey findings, based on interviews with corporate managers largely in agriculture, manufacturing and service sectors, showed growth in new job opportunities last month was higher since December 2016. The story continues on page 4 of the Business Daily. There are two business losses. This is how it looks. And investors have protested of the poor state of Eastgate Road off Mombasa Road, which has been rendered impassable by burst water pipes and unfinished roadworks. Companies with operations along the stretch, including Isuzu, Elgon, Kenya and Solpia, said their businesses had declined by up to 20%, with some of them having had to send casual workers home as a result. Tourists are also unable to use the road that also leads to the Nairobi National Park. Right? So the concerned agencies should see this and react swiftly. It is in dilapidated, deplorable condition, so they should be quick off the mark. Let's see also what is happening across the region, and we cross over now to Tanzania. where we have the Citizen for you. And this is what is on the front page of the Citizen. PCCB's plan to curb graft in business. Agency says it plans to come up with ways that will help the government to create a conducive and corruption-free environment for business. This story continues on page 2 of the Citizen this morning. Also, you have more information there. Flawed laws, policies is another story that you can follow on page 2, or the same story actually continues on page 2. Tanzanian jailed for life over terror attack in Kenya. Here are the faces of them. Tanzanian Rashid Charles Mberesero and fellow accused Hassan Aden Hassan and Muhammad Ali Abdikar sit in court in Nairobi yesterday before they were sentenced for their involvement in 2015 attack on Garissa University in northeast Kenya, in which 148 people were killed. Mberesero was handed a life sentence, while Hassan and Abdikadir were each sentenced to 41 years in jail. The story continues on page 4 of the Citizen. This is in Tanzania. Also, CSOs appeal to Magufuli not to assent to contentious law. That is a story that you can follow on page 2 also of the Citizen in Tanzania. Still there, we can pick up also the Mwananchi, the Swahili version of the Citizen. It says kitendawili uchaguzi kujaza nafasi ya Lissu. Kitendawili uchaguzi kujaza nafasi ya Lissu is a splash today. The story continues on page 4 of Mwananchi. And CAG asema wazi ukweli ndio mwarobaini wa rushwa. Ukweli ndio mwarobaini wa rushwa. You can follow the story on page 2 of the Citizen. Rais Kenyatta amfuata Magufuli kijijini Chato. Rais Kenyatta amfuata Magufuli kijijini Chato. That is a story that you can follow inside the Citizen on page 4 this morning. Right, allow me to continue to just also show you what we have as editorial cartoons, and also I'll hark you back to history and show you how the Daily Nation looked in 1963. Let's just continue pace and see what we have as editorial cartoons this morning. And this is what has been drawn today by Victor inside the Daily Nation. Let me just go back there quickly and show you what it has for us. There we go. This is according to Victor this morning. On my touchscreen seems to be acting again. Allow me to just try and tinker with it. Challenges of technology this morning. I'll try and tinker with it just briefly to show you. Yeah, there we go. Let me try and do it again. It's a bit temperamental this morning, but there you have it. This is on page 14 of the Daily Nation today. The Watermeloniers, and this is Dr. Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka, Artful Politics of a Green Exterior and Red Inside. Of course, you know he has been appointed by President Uhuru Kenyatta as a special envoy to South Sudan, and this is what has been captured by Stano inside the Daily Nation this morning. Let me try and show you also what we have inside the People Daily, according to, that was Victor, not Stano. And this is Stano right now with his editorial cartoon today. Quick, we are starving. And this is all about the county monies and the national government, of course. And we can see there, the chicks are crying. They need to be fed. And of course, now this has been caught up also between the MPs and the senators as far as the county budget is concerned. There's a stalemate there. They're heading to court this week. And this is what has been aptly captured also by Stano inside the People Daily. Let's see what Gado has for us. That is inside the Standard, and this is what Gado has drawn. Right, this is it, the BBI team. This is how it looks. I don't know what's happening this morning. well, it really wants me to get tactile with it. I will do that again so that it can react. Right? A bit temperamental this morning, the touch screen. But I need to show you this. This is what Gado has drawn for us this morning. BBI team busy at work, and you can see how it is working for them right now. But if you look keenly, what is happening is people are preparing actually for big positions. And we have, this is Atinga and Antoinette as well. And of course, they're preparing their suits. And that is for the Prime Minister and the President. And of course, debate has been about whether they're trying to get the Putin-Medvedev sort of style of leadership, right? So you swap the presidency and the Prime Minister and vice versa. And this is what has been captured by Gado inside the Standard this morning. So that is in the Standard. And I'll hark you back now to history a bit and show you how the Daily Nation looked way back in 1963 before we go to our topic this morning. We'll try and lift that quickly for you to see how it looked then. Seems like I've lost everything this morning. All right, today is the 4th, and this is how the Daily Nation looked way back in 1963. Still loading, hope it won't act upon me. See? Let's just give it some time. Well, I'll show you this later, much later in the course of the program. My touchscreen today, it's not with me. So I'll try and tinker with it much later in the course of the program. But remember, there we go. This is Negroes to Test Bill. That was Saturday, July the 4th, in 1964. This paper was going for 30 cents only. And it says the Civil Rights Bill is now law in America, and civil rights groups have immediately started testing whether its sweeping provisions against discrimination can break generations of racial barriers in North and South. 3 hours after the House sent the legislation to the White House yesterday, President Johnson signed it with an appeal to all Americans to join this effort to bring justice and hope to all our people. And this is what was on the front page of the Daily Nation way back in 1964 today. Also, Rhodesia is a UK issue. And you can see Dr. Milton Obote, Prime Minister of Uganda, said here today that the question of Southern Rhodesia should be a British government and not Commonwealth issue, according to Reuters report. Speaking at London Airport on his arrival there for the Commonwealth Prime Minister Conference, Dr. Obote said, and I cannot continue to quote what he said, but at least you get a snippet of how it looked way back in 1964. Right, we begin with some good news for milk consumers as retail prices fall by at least 5 shillings per half a litre. This change in price, however, will only affect milk produced by the new Kenya cooperative creameries. KCC says the move to cut prices has been made possible by the 25% growth in milk volumes supplied by farmers. A 500 millimeters packet of long life milk will now retail at 50 shillings, down from 55 shillings, while fresh milk on pouch package will sell at 48 shillings from 50 shillings previously. Data by the Kenya Dairy Board indicates that the state-owned dairy now commands 35% of the raw milk market, slightly behind Brookside Dairy, the market leader, with a 40% share of the market. And favorable taxes and regional preferential treaties are the two top ingredients that could help unlock the potential of the manufacturing sector, according to a study done by Strathmore University and Syspro, a software developer for enterprise resource planning. Now here is Alex Mwangi to paint a picture of the report's highlights.
The study saw interviews conducted with close to 100 companies drawn from 12 sectors of the production and manufacturing industries in Kenya. It comes at a time when concerns are mounting on how to address the challenge of training citizens to have the right skills to promote the sector.
What we would appreciate, of course, is greater participation by manufacturers in shaping the curriculum of these institutions.
The challenge for policymakers going forward is that technological advancements globally have reached the level where every so often they render the education meant to enable the youth get and create jobs obsolete within a very short time.
They're also talking in the information age that by the time you start university and you finish university 3, 5 or 7 years later, what you started learning will be outdated by the time you finish your degree.
And therefore it called for all of us to be able to understand and even have a broader view on how the dynamics of the global environment operate. And I get a sense that some of us perhaps have not been able to understand that. We are living in an environment that is very competitive.
Other factors that have a bearing on Kenya's manufacturing sector include a reduction in the cost of production, upgrading of existing technologies, and increasing the efficiency of production. External factors beyond the control of any single government, however, are also playing a role in denting the volume of global trade.
Tariffs are the most visible contributor to globalization, the slowing down of globalization or globalization. Instead of fixing the world's problems, globalization has actually fed a summer of discontent with many organizations around the world.
Support for apprenticeship and graduate internships were identified as major initiatives that will make local manufacturing an attractive business venture. Alex Mwangi, NTV.
Right. Now, diversifying the tea market, this is what you want to see what really happens there. And the International Trade Center has kicked off the first ever tea sensory and blending skills program for Kenya companies and packers in the specialty tea sector. The training is aimed at helping them diversify their product offer and adapt to new tea consumption trends in global markets. Tea consumption in East Africa has been growing over the last few years, but consumption trends are shifting away from the traditional preference for black tea to new products such as fruit and herbal blends or cold brews. As part of the program, the ITC will train the companies on tea sensory and blending skills as well as regulations required to access the European Union market as Kenya seeks to venture into new markets for its high quality tea. Now, conditions in the business environment registered a general improvement between May and June 2019, according to Stanbic Bank's Purchasing Managers Index. I just showed you lastly on the Business Daily. The index, which tracks the pulse of business activity monthly, stood at 54.3 in June 2019, up from 51.3 in the preceding month. Stanbic Bank has attributed this improvement to increased orders registered by businesses and improved cash flow. This comes at a time when growth in private sector stands at 4.9%, the highest growth rate reported since the cap on lending rates came into force. The bank further reports that the level of employment hit a 30-month high in June 2019. And Kenya and Qatar have signed a deal that will gives Qatar Airways greater access to Mombasa. The deal will increase the number of daily flights from Doha to Mombasa for Qatar's national carriers to 2. The deal has the potential of eating into the market share of Kenya Airways, but on the other hand, it is expected to contribute to additional tourist arrivals in the coastal city. The deal was signed by Transport Cabinet Secretary James Macharia and his Qatari counterpart. And competition heightens in the local beverages market as soft drink maker Coca-Cola launch 4 products with the aim of giving their consumers more options. The company aims at creating more opportunities for use of local ingredients and also encourage and enable their consumers to control added sugar consumption. Coca-Cola has invested 9.3 billion shillings in its production and packaging lines to cater for the new brands. The American-owned firm, which remains the biggest maker of soft drinks in the country, says it has invested over 8.5 billion shillings in Kenya.
We are investing heavily in innovation to get our consumers more of what they want.
You're watching In the Market, and of course we want to buckle down to a discussion this morning looking at a raft of issues that is affecting currently the market. And of course one of that is what happened just the first day of July, and it's about the death of Bob Collymore. And we know death comes to all, but great achievements build a monument which shall endure until the sun grows cold. These are the words of American philosopher and poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, which rings true as we mourn Bob Collymore, the Safaricom chief executive who has left a legacy unlike any corporate Kenya boss before him. Now, the reason why this loss is so heavy is that he touched so many hearts. Just last year, the International Finance Corporation lauded the firm's childcare program for working mothers that supports employees with children through on-site creches and additional paid maternity leave beyond the duration stipulated in the law. If there is a lesson here for corporate Kenya leaders, it is to actually walk the talk of supporting women's empowerment by starting right at their own companies. Mr. Collymore also played a major role in supporting the arts. Many journalists will also attest to the fact that he was the easiest CEO to interact with. He was direct with his answers, but perhaps Mr. Collymore's most enduring legacy will be that he made people feel seen, like they were worth something. He knew that he was at the helm of the most successful company in Kenya's history. Well, over to you, corporate Kenya bosses. What will your legacy be? That is a probing question. And of course, we want also to just throw this to a panelist this morning and discuss the corporate legacy that Bob Collymore has left. Remember, today also there will be a requiem mass just beginning at 9 o'clock at the Cathedral, All Saints Cathedral, where everyone will be heading there. And also that will be to add to the gaiety of the occasion will be President Uhuru Kenyatta as well. But I spoke to Bob Collymore here on AM Live 3 years back, where we were tackling the issue of leadership and integrity. And he had this to say. Bob, let me try also and reset my stopwatch here. You've got 10 minutes starting now.
You know, one of the great things about being on a panel with Mugo Kabati is that he actually is a very smart guy, and he's one of the best political leaders that Kenya has never had. And he says it all. You know, he says it in the way that I think many of us on the panel would like to say it. Much of the narrative around corruption has focused on the public sector, or indeed leaders of parastatals. Very little of the narrative is around us as individuals. We often point the finger at the pebbles. We point the finger at the policeman who takes a bribe at the roundabout. But we don't point the fingers at the people who give the bribe. And often you sit at dinners or drinks parties and people talk about how much they manage to escape, how little they manage to escape paying the policeman. For the public sector to get involved in corruption and bribery, it requires the private sector to fund it. And so I go much further, and I say that the source of corruption is the private sector, whether the private sector in an individual capacity or the private sector in a corporate capacity. I was having lunch with the chief Justice, Willie Mutunga, a little while ago, and he said to me that apparently in Kenya, there's no word for corruption in the mother tongue, but there is a word for theft and for a thief. And in Kenya, we know how to handle thieves, because if you steal a purse or a handbag, you will be lynched by the mob. Justice will be executed. However, if you're a corporate chief, if you're a chief executive or a finance director, and you steal $1 billion shillings, and we have no end of examples in the newspapers, you will get off scot-free. And as Mugo said, and Joshua says a lot, we admire corruption. We also aspire to corruption. So given an opportunity, we will all get involved in corruption because we point the finger at other people. We don't point the finger at ourselves. And this is why a little while ago, a group of companies came together under this heading of Business Against Corruption in Kenya to sign up to a set of practices which says that not only will we sign the code of ethics, but we will also not work with people who don't sign that code of ethics. In Safaricom, we have actually asked our 350 vendors to each sign the code, and they have to do that by the 15th of March. And if the 16th of March you haven't signed, then you will no longer be a vendor to Safaricom. We've gone further than that, and we form a small coalition. So if you are blacklisted from KCB, you will also be blacklisted from Safaricom. If you're blacklisted from government procurement, you will also be blacklisted from Safaricom. But Mugo makes a very good point, that a lot of this is actually lip service. We sign the code of ethics, and we sign the code against corruption, but how many of us actually really live up to it? How many of us exercise consequence management? Safaricom is one of the companies that's very open about it, and often on social media, people say, Safaricom, you're thieves. And we say, yeah, we know that, and that's why we deal with it. And that's why whenever you look at our sustainability report, you'll see that we're exiting people at the rate of just over 1 a week. And I'm proud to be associated with companies like KCB, who are similarly dealing with this. And even the media often criticizes other people for corruption. But I challenge any media company, we're here at Nation Media Group today, I challenge any media company to tell me that their own accounts department is not involved in corruption. Their own editorial staff is not involved in corruption. Their own advertising department is not involved in corruption. So my plea really is that we start to look inwards. We start to look at our own behavior. We start to look at our own propensity to pay that 500 shilling bribe to the policeman. The day we all are prepared to go to jail, we are prepared to actually have an overnight in jail for not paying a bribe, is the day we will really start to address this corrosive thing called corruption or theft. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
You left it midway. Thank you. Bob Collymore, while he was here on AM Live, talking on leadership and integrity and how we can tackle corruption. And I want to introduce our panelists this morning just to also weigh in, as we shall be discussing, of course, a raft of issues as far as in the market is concerned. And we have with us this morning Patrick Obath, who is a managing partner at Adam Smith, also the vice chair of KEPSA Foundation, and the director of board management at Standard Chartered Bank. Also, we have with us this morning Geoffrey Odundo, who is the CEO of Nairobi Securities Exchange. We have also the CEO of Kenya Bankers Association. This is Dr. Habil Olaka. And also we have the general manager of Equity Bank. This is Polycarp Igathe. Good to see you, sir. It's been a while.
Nice to see you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Maybe we could just begin from that particular point, Bob Collymore and the legacy he left. Especially, he was really vocal about fighting corruption, and you've heard him saying that corruption is not just from the government side, that even the private sector is funding and is actually funding the corruption that is happening in the government. Maybe we can just begin with you, Polycarp.
First of all, let me say pass my condolences to his family.
Yes.
And obviously to Safaricom for having lost such an iconic leader and, of course, father figure. And he was a friend of mine. And more than anything else, if you ask me the memory I have of Bob the most is when he led all of us as private sector to draft the anti-bribery law, which was enacted by President Uhuru Kenyatta, I think in December of 2016. And I think that is what he's alluding to when he appeared on AM Live. And like he says, he came, he lived, and he left a footprint on this earth. And we thank God that some of us were privileged to have encountered and interacted with an individual of such colossal value to society, not just to himself.
Right. Habilalaka.
Yeah, let me also join my colleagues in passing my condolences to the family and to Safaricom for, I think we have lost a leader who led by example. Bob was, a corporate leader that led by example. And, the evidence is quite there. I mean, it's all over the place. You can see wherever he has interacted, he has not only lived by it, but shows it by example. He mentioned in that clip about the code of ethics.
Yes.
That was driven by KEPSA. And I think he was one of the few who not only went by it, but also enforced it within his institution and ensured that it's enforced, including the suppliers and all the people who interacted with Safaricom. I think one of the things that he possibly did not mention there, which again came out quite openly, he was the first CEO that went out publicly and disclosed his remuneration to the public.
Yes.
I think followed by Joshua Igara. And that was really an act of boldness because it is something that had not been done. Right now, I think a number of leaders, especially for those who are quoted, are now, the regulations require that disclosure. But he was amongst the very first one to come out openly and start disclosing. In other words, you live transparently. People know, the public know what you are being remunerated for, and there's total disclosure. And I think that was some act of boldness that we all should emulate.
Thank you. Right. Let's hear from Geoffrey.
Okay, thank you, Debarl. I'll also take the same position and also as my panelists to pass my condolences to the family and also to Safaricom. Being one of our largest listed company on the NSE, Bob led an excellent organization. And he redefined corporate leadership, in our view. Our interactions with Bob were more around how do we change the thinking about corporate leadership as opposed to being profit-driven. How do you give the holistic approach of driving things around sustainability and running good businesses? And even as recent as a couple of months ago, he was sharing a panel on shared value, how corporate organizations can enhance their growth through doing good to society, issues around governance of organizations, interacting with investors, and the whole holistic approach towards running a successful company. And I think we as corporate leaders now need to really redefine leadership. How do we embody all the things that Bob talked about, especially around corruption, because this is a big challenge for a lot of corporate organizations, and we need to change the approach. So I think Bob has left a great legacy that we and companies that are listed have to emulate.
Right, Patrick Bob.
Again, similarly, to join my colleagues in sending condolences to his family and the family of Safaricom. I interacted with Bob the first time, I think, in 2011. And this was on a forum on sustainability for businesses, even before the sustainable business goals were written. And at that time, already part of what he was talking about was the fact that sustainability is all about integrity in businesses. And that was the first encounter. But I think what, on a personal basis, sort of struck me, and I still remember up to this date, was a statement he made during the Kenya for Kenyans, when you're sort of doing drought work and everything else. And we had gone to Turkana on a flight, some of us business leaders were taken there basically to work on the ground. And we came across 78-year-old people there with a can, a 2 kg Kimbo tin, sitting on the ground waiting for grains to be brought in. And his comment was, we must restore the dignity of life. Mm-hmm. That was a simple statement he made. And in conversations later, he said that if when you look at that person who's 70 years old, having that tin waiting for food, that was not dignity. That is somebody who has lived on this earth, served and done a lot of things. But where he was sitting waiting for that was not dignity. And he said, as corporates, our key role must be to continuously restore the dignity of people's lives. And I think if you take that thread around a lot of the things that he did, including issues like integrity, mm-hmm. anti-corruption and all the rest of it, is around restoring dignity to lives. And that, I think, something that from that time has struck me and guides me in a lot of things. So I think he was profound in a lot of ways. Everything he touched was extremely, I think, touched on a lot of people in the private sector, individuals he interacted with. And I think for me, that was the one moment that I remember, and I remember for a long time.
One of the things that actually he talks about from that particular clip is the consequence management that as Safaricom, they intently followed in the management. And I think also that is a good aspect, that consequence management, where we have to take responsibility as a corporate to the things that sometimes really adversely affect the society, maybe has directly or remotely come from maybe a corporate sector. I don't know what aspect of consequence management when it comes to fighting corruption you can actually peg your thoughts on, Polygathe.
Debarl, thanks for that question. I think the institution of consequence management that we have in our society, even going beyond the corporate boundary, surely is the judiciary mm-hmm. and the criminal justice system. So we are seeing arrests, I think, to Bob's question, but I think generally as a country we all have this big sigh of frustration around, yes, we are doing that, but nobody's yet to see people of significance or substance yes. suffer the consequences mm-hmm. of breach of bribery. I think in private sector, we need to remember, take the life of Bob now coming back into the corporate sector, and remember those words, that every corporate executive needs to remember they are the chief consequence manager of their unit at a micro level, to then take the action that they need to take. And I think that's happening mm-hmm. Increasingly. And the environment is changing, especially legalistically. I can tell you 2016, the Anti-Bribery Act came into force.
Yes.
2009, we had in the banking industry something transformative that is called the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act, POCAMLA 2009. Mm-hmm. This is the one that doesn't allow you to, that makes you have to declare when you bring $1 million shillings to the bank. So I think we've taken the right direction. The national conversation now is about, let's accelerate the pace. Mm-hmm. We are all working towards, but all of us are begging and appealing that we need to see real action and perhaps more acceleration of action in the judicial side, and even at the individual, corporate, firm level, the consequences of breach of integrity as integrity is defined within that organization needs to continue to be upheld. Mm-hmm. Because for far too long, people who take the shortcuts were gaining on people who take the long cut. Mm-hmm. So you didn't need to work hard. You just needed to find a crevice of bribery, a crevice of corruption, to then say, I have made it in business, and then call yourself an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Right, consequence management.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Bob mentioned, and I think he was referring to Mugo Kebati's discussion, he talked about Mugo having mentioned about we pay lip service to these measures we put in place. You have got sometimes the right laws, you have got the code of ethics, you have got anti-bribery law, but there is no enforcement or at the corporate level. And he gave a very good example. He talked about at Safaricom, if you are a supplier and you do not abide by the code of ethics, you are cut off. And if you're cut off or blacklisted by another institution, like, and he gave the example of KCB,
yes,
then Safaricom will also cut you off. That's a very deliberate way of ensuring that you enforce, which means that you're actually looking at the consequence management. Mm-hmm. so that there is no way you'll just have provisions or procedures in place and there's no enforcement, so that people do not bear the consequences of the actions they have taken. And I think he led by example. He showed it and he lived by it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Lastly, also, let's hear from Modundo and Patrick on this, on consequence management, corruption emanating also from the private sector. And I think also, Patrick Obath, you've been particularly intent on holding conferences on this. You can also give us also the results of, I think, last week's conference that was ideally trying to mainstream ethics as well when you're talking about corruption in the country. Geoffrey.
I think consequence management is very critical going forward. I mean, I think we have got to move away from providing lip service to our action-oriented approach. And I think the most important thing is, how do you disclose it? Now, Bob alluded to the fact that they were the first company to disclose how many staff they let off because of issues around corruption and theft. And they did this through their sustainability report. Now, the initial impact of that was a lot of headlines and the fact that, oh, Safaricom are laying off people, et cetera, et cetera. So sort of setting a negative connotation to that action. But what it did, it was the reverse. It actually sends a message that this company is actually running very effective policies towards action about integrity. And that what that led to is a lot of appreciation of this company and greater interest on how they're doing the business, and even improved business. Because effective policy management leads to effective performance. And on the same continent, they also have a good reward system. So it's not just a one-way sort of approach. They're doing good rewards for good performance and consequence management for those who misperform. And I think that's what a lot of companies need to embody now and be very bold about disclosing these in their integrated accounts and also in their sustainability reports. Because the messaging is important, that if you commit acts of integrity, acts against integrity rather, then you get actually punished for it. And it has to be cut across both private and public sector. As Igade has said, especially in the judiciary is really the arm that we need to look at. But if no action is taken at that level, then it becomes an acceptable norm in society, and that has to change. So I think in the private sector, the disclosures and the actions that you take need to be made public, and just people to know that this institution is intolerant to issues around integrity and corruption.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, and of course, as you raised that, there's the issue of the integrity reporting and the disclosure that maybe we can also just tease out a bit before we take a short break and also we buckle down now to the issues of the day. But Patrick, you can comment on that before we come to integrated reporting.
I think two things. One thing of what Bob said and what happened at the conference last week. The issue of building coalitions to fight corruption. What he talked about, there was building a series of companies that together will blacklist a series of companies that don't behave well when they're doing business with them. He mentioned just one or two companies. I think it behoves on us as a private sector to basically make it a point that all of us will not deal with companies that are involved with corruption, and create a register, like a corruption reference bureau. I think we talked about this the other time, whereby basically, if they've been blacklisted by Safaricom, by KCB, by the bank where I sit, and so forth and so on, they're basically every time they reference into that place, and before you do business, you check with them. I think we need to be bold enough to do that, and that was actually one of the outcomes of the conference last week, because when we spoke, we realized that there was a lot of initiatives in terms of having ethical business. And we said, why is everybody trying to do the same thing? That was a question that started at the beginning of the conference. At the end of the conference, we said, actually, it isn't a bad thing, right? All you do is basically make sure that we all work together as the different initiatives, because the initiatives appeal to different DNAs of companies. So you may have one that is done by a group of people who are interested. They'll get a particular colony of companies, another one started by a different group of people, and another colony of companies. Rather than say this is, this to the exclusion of the other, bring them together and say, all of you are doing the same thing. Why don't we ascribe to the same thing, promote each of us together, and then you build a bigger coalition. So I think the essence of what you said and what came out last week is, let us build bigger coalitions to basically fight corruption. And if we can do that in the private sector and make it big, we can then turn around to the government and say, do the same thing. At the moment, you're saying government, you do it, but we haven't done it ourselves, which is not, which I don't think they'll buy, because we are the big guys who sort of pay for the corruption that is happening.
The issue of integrated reporting also is so big, and we've seen that codified within the Capital Markets Authority corporate governance codes. We've seen companies disclosing, even the salaries of their CEOs as well, and that, I think, looking at the codes intently, they say if a company is not really doing well, also the CEO should take a pay cut. If the company is doing well as well, the bonuses, of course, should be given to the CEO as well. And we've seen this being splashed on the front pages of our business dailies as well. In light of this, and what Bob was talking about disclosure, and him also revealing what he really earned even to the public, followed by Joshua Oigara, why haven't also the corporate sector really taken this baton and moved with it? Because we've seen along the way, not many companies are doing this from the private sector, because now this is an issue of a law, they have to do it. But looking at, we cannot really speak for the government, but looking also on the other side, we've not really seen this really happening. But I think corporate governance cuts across both private and public. Paul Gathe.
Debarl, I think under CMA rules, and maybe my colleague Odundo here will have more detail than I do, under CMA there are certain protocols and rules and regulation. We are all operating in regulated markets. If you're a bank, you have a regulator in central bank. If you're a publicly quoted company, you have a regulator in the Capital Markets Authority. But you have to remember that when Bob and Joshua took that wonderful, bold step, the ridicule that came against them. There's something in the Kenyan DNA that trivializes perhaps the most important things that we need to fix. You still remember, if you go around to your research, you'll see how we trivialized, and everybody started to say, you mean they're earning that much? Or who do you think they are? I mean, we were there, and I remember speaking to Bob then and saying, my goodness, sometimes you do things with the right intent, but then the outcome.
Consequences, yeah.
Today, CMA has said, for governance purposes, disclose salaries of executives. But you see the way it's reported in the media. I'm telling you, those executives whose salaries are disclosed, they can't even go to their rural homes, because then Kenyans think you're an ATM without a PIN number. We've got to be. We also have to be realistic and understand there's some people who can't handle certain level of information. But anyway, so that's an argument for another day.
Of course, reporting this.
No, not misreporting. You've been reporting correctly. It's
correctly.
Just it's the audience.
The perception.
It's the audience who've been taking it perhaps in a different way. But back to your question. Your real question is around triple reporting, how you report. I think in today's world, a business cannot just be about profit. If you're not, and Bob's point and Bob's life was an icon. For lack of a better word, he always believed in shared prosperity. As an individual, as a corporate leader, as what he does. So it's not about the profit that we earn. Okay, so you made a profit, so what? What else did it do to society? So today's business, and we in corporate life, must understand if your business is not contributing anything beyond profit, then that is what we mean by triple bottom line reporting: social impact, profit in the business, and what else you're doing for society. And I think in Kenya, with respect, I think very many organizations, large and small, are doing it. You start to do it. In the organization where I work at Equity Bank, our program in Wings to Fly, our profitability, what we do, our lending practices, we try and weave that into everything we do on an everyday basis. And I think we are succeeding more than we are failing. Could we do better? Of course we could do better. Each one of us could do better. And I think more than anything else, today let us remember Bob Collymore. The best way of remembering Bob Collymore is by invigorating, refreshing, reinventing ourselves in pursuit of shared prosperity.
All right. We need to take a short break right now. When we circle back, of course, we can continue with integrated reporting a bit. Then we go now to the issues of the day that are really affecting, of course, the market as well. Banking profits, they've hit 56.8 billion shillings in the first quarter. But ironically, looking at the listed companies at the NSE, Also, people who are retrenching the most are the banks. So we try to drill deeper in this and see why we're having all these profits, but yes, they're still laying off, according to the listed companies at the NSE as well. And the rising cost of living. Kenyans are paying more to eat ugali than the rest in East Africa. Why is that? Also, we probe that deeply with our panelists on the other side of the break. New derivatives products also at the Nairobi Securities Exchange is on the list of the discussion as well. But before I take a short break, I just want to show you this. This is a program today of the Requiem Mass that will be happening at the All Saints Cathedral Memorial Service for Bob Collymore. All Saints Cathedral, and you can see the presiding ministers also are given there. It's a long list, I can't read all of it. But of course, also President Uhuru Kenyatta will be addressing this particular memorial service this morning as well. This is a program, and everyone also, I think on this panel will be headed there today, everyone from the corporate sector as well. So don't go away, much more coming up on the other side of the program. You're watching In the Market here on AM Live, looking at the state of economy. Don't go away. Jacob Igathe, who is the General Manager, Equity Bank. Also, Dr. Habil Alaka, the CEO of Kenya Bankers Association. We do have with us Patrick Obath, who is the Managing Partner at Adam Smith International, also the Vice Chair of KEPSA Foundation. We have also the CEO of Nairobi Securities Exchange, Geoffrey Odundo. And also joining us this morning as well is Kiprono Kitoni, who is the Vice Chair of World Chamber Federation and also the Chair of Radio Africa. You're the only person who didn't give a sporting chance to actually weigh in on Bob Collymore. I know you guys got along famously with Bob Collymore as well. Good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Debarl.
Yeah, talk to us about your...
Well, like many Kenyans, I was extremely saddened by Bob's passing on. I had lunch with him 3 weeks ago, and he was in extremely high spirits. He was quite optimistic about the future. And Bob, in his usual manner, was obviously full of solutions about many things facing our society.
Yes,
and we had conversations about many things on that occasion. But I would say that Bob's impact, in life, every so often we get people who you encounter whose impact in small and big actions impact on so many people's lives. And I think Bob was one such person. I mean, he impacted so many people. He impacted the Safaricom ecosystem. He impacted on our leadership through his big drive for ethical leadership and good governance. He impacted on the performing arts. I mean, he did so much for people in the artists, musicians, fine artists, and he provided them a platform to really develop their careers. And the last thing I'll say about Bob is that he had a really great ability to develop friendship. I mean, he was fiercely loyal to his friends, and I would say that really his demise is not just a loss to us in Kenya, to his family, but a loss to humanity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We were also looking at the aspect of integrated reporting because when we look at Bob Collymore, the issue of corporate governance was his legacy. I think he has been iconic in trying to leave a legacy of good corporate governance in this country. And this is an aspect of integrated reporting from the capital markets authorities, what we call it, corporate codes that we're trying to instill in this country. We're saying many of our listed companies have been disclosing some of the executives and executive directors' pay, and we've seen that being splashed on the media. But this is not happening also with the public sector as well. And we were just also saying, with the tongue-in-cheek, many of them here, I can see Geoffrey Odundo is one, of course, a person's salary that we've seen splashed on the Business Daily. And we get to be depressed as Kenyans sometimes when we see this as well. But in light of that, we can see, yes, there is those salaries, but the discrepancies even within the company is another question, because we saw there is a listed company, our CEO is walking away with huge bonuses and salaries, yet the company is not performing well. But in light of what the court really says, the executive should take a pay cut. Isn't that the case? Let's hear from Habil Alaka, then we'll come to you, Geoffrey.
Yeah, the way I look at it is when you talk about integrated reporting, I think is to look at where we are coming from.
Yes.
We are coming from a scenario where we are mainly giving the annual reports. The annual reports are driven by the financial reporting, which is what Polycarp mentioned about the profits. But in integrated reporting, we're trying to bring what you call the 3 Ps together. By 3 Ps, we mean the profit, the people, and the planet. So you're looking at the social impact, the environmental impact, and of course, the economic impact in terms of the profit drivers. And so the annual reporting was more geared towards, the profitability. Now, you're trying to bring in integrated reporting where you're trying to look at the impact that the entity has, not only in terms of maintaining itself sustainably, economically in terms of profitability, but also in terms of ensuring that the environment is sustained and the society gets its livelihood. And so, the integrated reporting is a clear way of trying to bring this to report that whole picture to the consumer, which is the public. And I think Bob lived with that. He's amongst the first who drove this integrated reporting. He started by giving the sustainability reports, and sustainability reports now most corporates are beginning to give out sustainability reports on an annual basis. And Bob was one of the first who led that route. And then one of the things I caught the time when he was asked about his legacy, and he talked about, you know, he looks at leaving a legacy not just in terms of shareholder value, but going beyond that to create a livelihood out there for people that endures over time. And I think he's looking at it not only from profit. Yes, profit is important. Shareholder return is important. But also, you've got an ecosystem. You've got people out there whose lives depend on you. You've got the environment that you've got to conserve to ensure that the future generations have got a better place to live in. And I think he's one guy who lived with that.
All right, Geoffrey.
Okay, Debarl, on this issue about integrated reporting, I think as the NSC and as capital market players, we have actually come up with a way of encouraging companies to do this, more from a voluntary perspective as opposed to enforcement. The capital markets code of governance actually encourages this kind of reporting, and ideally what it meant to do is that we've got to go beyond the numbers. We want companies to go beyond the numbers and tell really their story on how they're relating with the communities they serve. And we want to see organizations move from corporate social responsibility to corporate social investments and really have tangible things they talk about. And I'm really delighted that some of our companies have actually got thematic initiatives that they're running with, and very consistently. Polycarp alluded about the Wings to Fly program. I attended the launch of the Wings to Fly last year. And if you hear those stories and what they have done to really identify the poor of the poor and make these children go to Ivy League universities like Harvard, I mean, it was very, very moving. Look at Standard Chartered with the marathon and what it has to do to improving people's eyesight. The M-Pesa Foundation under Safaricom, a school, a tangible school that exists. Corporate bank with what they're doing towards scholarships and things like this. So companies, what the whole essence of that is actually to make you bring up and really make some corporate social investments in very, very tangible and practical approaches so that you're able to really bring this out. And we've seen a very high correlative effect between integrated reporting and performance of these companies, and even performance of the shares. Because what happens, communities then tend to appreciate that this company is not just all about profit, but it's about us as well. We are stakeholders in this business. And that is one thing that I believe has driven the performance of these companies. I think the disclosures we make in those accounts, I think beyond just the salaries, and I must say I'm not among the top, so I also feel the way you feel. But what does it do? I mean, we should go beyond that, because the accounts speak more than just the salaries. And I have no problem with high earned salaries, because I think it's a correlation to the performance of the organization. I think they need to bring out the other aspects of what these companies are doing and really doing to improve society. And they're clearly aligned to even the bigger picture about the SDG goals. So there has to be a whole disclosure around all those aspects, and that's something that we're happy to do. It is a painful start, as you must imagine, when your salaries and all this are being disclosed, but I think it's now becoming more acceptable. I've attended shareholder meetings where these matters are discussed, and in one particular meeting, I think the shareholders were very happy with how the CEO performed and said he deserved this pay. So I think the journey has begun, and I'd like to encourage more companies to especially take the listing approach, because that's the way you enhance transparency, you enhance better governance of your companies, and also disclosures, and that's good for business.
Right. And of course, I want to bring up this editorial cartoon that I think was drawn by Gado 2 months ago. This is in light of the KQ. Look at that over there, where we had the immediate former now CEO, that is Sebastian, walking away with, look at that briefcase. What of course is jutting out every which way, but look what is leaving behind. There's a 7.5 billion shillings loss at KQ right now. There's bad service, there's more bad service, there's crooked or contracts, I should say. There's KQ arrogance manual over there. But he's trying to bring out the picture where you are walking away with a good tidy sum of money, but look at what is happening at this company. And I think that is the essence of what we were talking about this morning with the integrated reporting as well. How then can this happen in light of the current capital markets, corporate codes? Because this is your listed, one of your listed company.
Maybe let me weigh in on that. I've been involved.
I can see Geoffrey now.
I've been involved in both.
For a suicide pass.
I'll take it head on. Debarl, I've been involved in boards, both in the listed in the UK and listed here.
Yes.
And I'll go back to listed in the UK because whatever we're doing here has been happening there, and it's going in a cycle. And the cycle is when you disclose, all of a sudden there is, everybody is up in arms and sort of, these are kind of figures, because it's the first time they're facing that reality. But then the second thing that then happens is that the pay of CEOs, even directors, and in companies and so forth, is pegged onto a lot of things other than just what you see. If you look at now the expectations from the Capital Markets Authority on the performance of the CEO, of the boards, of the organizations, there's a whole series of accountabilities that begin to kick in. Now, those are things that were not there before. So all of a sudden, like taking personal responsibility as an individual. Before it was the company that took the responsibility. But because of the misbehavior of certain people in companies,
yes,
it shifted to people taking personal responsibility for those performances. Now, that comes at a cost to the individual, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing that happens is, because it is now being disclosed, and
yes,
this is an evolution as well that will happen, the boards of companies are now beginning to look at how you determine the performance of a CEO in detail. So that at the end of the day, when it comes to questioning by the shareholder, you've actually got a matrix that says, this is what we asked them to do, this is what they've done. The third thing is, there is a historical, there is also the historical performance of the company, not just the instant when you're actually deciding that. So there is also the historical performance that builds up on the remuneration of the CEO and so forth. So I think rather than look at, like for example, KQ at that point in time, look at KQ over the last 3 or 4 years. What has happened? They've gone through a restructuring, they've gone through a whole series of things. And the pay of the CEO, whereas it's a CEO now, maybe it started off with the CEO who was there before, has actually been coming up because of the performance of the company over time. So when you come in, you inherit whatever was happening and you continue with it. If you have a fall, right, a good board will basically freeze it. If you're culpable and you caused that 53 billion on an individual basis, you will be out, you'll be sacked. So I think let's not just look at that number, but look at the whole ecosystem that determined that number. And I think one thing that is going to happen as a result of this, of the corporate governance requirements now from the capital markets, is that boards are going to be a lot more, they're going to be a lot more scrutiny on how you determine pay, but also shareholders are going to be a lot more interested in how the pay of CEO is determined and how you reward the CEO for what reason. And like happened in the UK, when I sat on boards there, they will actually not pass the annual report and everything else, and they will actually rebel at the AGM if they're not happy about what you're doing. That is going to happen in this country, you can be sure, in the next 3 or 4 years, right? So what you're seeing now is, I think, just the beginning of this accountability matrix that's beginning to happen. And yeah, the fallout will come. But at the moment, I think people are asking questions, you're asking the questions, that is the right thing to happen at this point in time.
All right. Geoffrey.
I think just building on what Patrick has said, today when a CEO is assessed, it's just not assessed on his financial performance. In fact, I think financial performance counts for just about slightly below 50% of the appraisals. I think you're looking at new matrices that are coming in. For instance, how do you deepen shareholders' value? Number one. How do you deal with issues of risk in that organization? How do you drive strategy in the organization? How do you then ensure sustainability of those companies? Because it's not just about profit. I mean, we've seen companies collapse because of strategic failures, and CEOs are being held to account to that level. And as such, despite the fact that, and again, most CEOs are on contract, and these contracts are actually triennial or 4 years, and before you get a new contract, there's such drama on whether you're going to get it or not, and the appraisal process, etc. So there's been a very good build-up towards how do you then create a very holistic CEO in an organization as opposed to a very one-targeted approach towards this. Speaking about companies, especially companies that go into distress, I think, as Obata said, when you come in as a CEO, you're actually taking over the existing situation. It's not that you're creating a new situation, and sometimes the strategy doesn't work. And when disclosures happen, then CEOs are under in some amount of pressure to perform. And when they feel that, and when shareholders feel that the performance is not happening, then you actually face the early exit, and some just take it voluntarily, like when in certain cases. So I think disclosure is helping. It's helping to hold CEOs to account to a very high level. Annual shareholders meetings are just not rubber stamps anymore. They actually, another appraisal for CEOs, I've done 5 of these, and I can tell you it's not a very easy event because questions are asked. Shareholders are getting more informed. The financial literacy of shareholders is increasing. They're asking very, very highly relevant and technical questions. So I think it's a great improvement, and it's really helping to improve how businesses are run.
All right. Let's say from Polycarp.
I think this question of CEO remuneration.
And where do they, because I can't hear also the pay cuts are coming into play.
Okay.
All of you are being mealy-mouthed about the pay cut when the company is not performing well. Because also for me, I need to get clarity from the courts. Where does the pay cut come into play? Is it when the company is not doing well? Also, the CEO should take a fair share of the loss through the salary cut, or where does it happen?
Debarl, I've been a CEO for well over a decade now, and I can tell you, a CEO is just like you or any other person without all the whining. The CEO is a person who comes to the table only with solutions. He's the person who takes ultimate responsibility and ultimate consequences for the success or failure of the organization. That's simple as it is. And that person, therefore, their job is high risk, and it's simple economics: high risk, high return. That's the way it. And so, also to your point, you make a very valid point. There should also be a downside to what the CEO does. But more than anything else, I think the work of the CEO, the primary job, is the customer. But because of overregulation and regulation overreach and many other things, today the CEO is seen as a back office person. He spends more time with lawyers and auditors, more than with customers. Because if you spend time with customers,
and the ESCC as well,
and of course, and if a customer loves you, no one will harm you. If you keep on spending time with the customer, you innovate, you learn, you grow more value, you expand shared prosperity, and that is the example we saw in a man like Bob Collymore. Nobody represented that more than anyone else. As when I watched him from the sidelines, when I had lunch with him, when I interacted with him, that is what you saw in the person. So I think but at the same time, the CEO is the person who reminds everybody their role. The shareholder invests in the employee. The employee invests in the customer. Then the customer rewards the shareholder. And if you try and short circuit that cycle, that's when you have trouble. Yeah, when shareholders, for instance, want to take more from the customer, the work of the CEO is also to tell the shareholder, wait a minute, this is customer. You can't take from the customer, and also the employee, you can't take from the customer, and that's my view on that subject. I think, and we need a lot more CEO types coming through the system.
Right. Let's say from Habil and then also from Kiprono, then we wind up on the integrated reporting.
Yeah. Debarl, I think this issue is well depicted by the cartoon that you used to introduce.
Yes.
Where there is the picture that is painted about Kenya Airways, and then the picture that is painted about the CEO living with quite some handsome reward. And I think there's an issue of perception and the reality on the ground. So the perception created there is that Kenya Airways has underperformed. It has destroyed shareholder value, and the CEO apparently is being rewarded for non-performance. But actually the reality on the ground is that if you look at where Kenya Airways was the time when the CEO came in, pick on a figure like even profitability, where it was when the CEO came in, and the point at which you are now measuring performance, you will see that it's a loss, yes, but it's a reduced loss.
Yes.
So in terms of his performance, he has actually improved performance and is being rewarded for the specific performance over that period, irrespective of the fact that you are still making a loss with the company. And I think what I was trying to draw up is the difference between the perception created by the to the public out there in terms of an unperforming entity and the actual reality on the ground in terms of what the CEO has delivered over the period.
Right, thank you. Kiprono, lastly.
Thank you. Let me speak on behalf of the shareholders now.
Yes.
I think most of my colleagues. But I'll start by just, making reference to Jeff. Jeff says he's not at the top of the food chain in terms of salary. But I sit on his board. I sit on his board. He may not be earning as much as Monica, but he's not doing too badly. I can confirm that he's not doing too badly. Let me just speak to the whole issue of integrated reporting. I think we need to look at the genesis of integrated reporting. I mean, if you remember the fiasco of Arthur Andersen in the United States in, I think, 2006 or 2007, and the subsequent meltdown in Wall Street, and the whole issue about what must be reported and what needs not be reported. And I think that is really the genesis. And we've seen since that meltdown in Wall Street that there's a big push globally for companies to be more transparent in the information that they give access to their shareholders, to all stakeholders, and the whole issue of integrated reporting. And I think also we cannot ignore the intervention of technology. I mean, we have artificial intelligence today, we have voice, we have biometric technology that's available, we have the digital footprint that we leave on our mobile phone. So there is a lot more information that is in the public domain today. So I think the whole issue of transparency today, the conversation around transparency is one that we cannot ignore. Now, in terms of pay cut versus payroll, I think I agree with my colleagues here that you see, over time, you must measure the performance of a CEO using a defined matrix over a period of time. Unfortunately, reporting is either annual or biannual. But then the reality is to turn around a business like Kenya Airways will take several years. And like Hebel said, I mean, you'll be looking at many metrics and in terms of the reduction of loss and things like that. And I think, for me, I believe in the old school of thought that if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And you see, if we're going to run a company like Kenya Airways and you're going to have, the top caliber of management, we need to really pay competitively. And I think it's also a very good way of ensuring that we're insulating them from corruption. But I think what we need to see more than anything else is servant leadership, like was espoused by Bob Collymore. I mean, where Bob really put the stakeholders' interests well ahead of his own personal interests.
Thank you very much. Right, we want to see also how the banking sector is performing right now, and in light of that, what also is listed on the NSE, especially the banks. And we can report that commercial banks' profit before tax for the first 4 months of 2019 rose by 15% to 56.8 billion shillings, up from 49.9 billion shillings on increased lending, according to fresh data by the Central Bank of Kenya. According to the regulator's report, customers' deposits shrunk slightly to 3.37 trillion shillings from 3.4 trillion shillings. As at March, the jump in earnings comes at a time when credit growth to the private sector improved to 4.9%, the highest level since introduction of a red cap law that has dragged economic growth by stagnating cash lent to business at below 4%, thus falling short of the recommended 12%. And we just want to also just put this on the table of Habil Olaka, because you can tell us, in light of this and what is happening I'd raised that question of some of the banks also have been on the Nairobi Securities Exchange lists of people who are spending a lot of money, laying off staffs as well. How does this, first of all, in light of what you're talking about, integrated reporting, and the layoffs and the huge margins that we're having over here. First, let's talk about the cumulative loan book for the sector that grew to 2.6 trillion shillings, the highest point in the country's history, buoyed, of course, by the relative economic environment right now. Let's begin from there.
Yeah, Debarl, the issue about profitability in the banking sector, and when it's apparently being displayed as improving, it's very difficult to divorce it from the reality on the ground, where there is another constraint, and which was even mentioned in the report you gave of the capping environment. So it's like capping, how can you be complaining about capping at the same time the profitability seems to be improving? And I think we need to possibly go back and look at where the profits are being generated from. There was some minimal improvement in terms of increased lending, But most of it is actually coming from other activities that are not necessarily aligned to the economic supporting activities. So, and by this, for instance, lending to government is quite a significant generator of those profits. Then the other one is in the environment in which banks are operating where there's a capping. I think they have had to relook at their business models and try to become as efficient as possible within that environment to be able to have some return to the shareholder at the end of the day. And no wonder some of the measures you talked about in terms of reducing staff, in terms of reducing their branch network, and a number of other also leveraging on technology to have used the alternative channels for accessing their customers, in terms of looking at the business model. And part of it is, of course, cutting costs, which means that it will be felt through some of the examples you gave. And also the other point is the fact that a number of them have actually extended their operations into the East African markets in terms of opportunities that are out there. They are extending their operation to the market to exploit or to take advantage of opportunities that exist. So I think we need to look at the profitability, growth, and where it's coming from, and what it therefore means for the country. And I think clearly it shows that the potential is there, but with a constraint like the capping removed, I think we can be able to achieve much better performance as an economy. And as we know, the unavailability of credit to the segments of the economy that are driving growth tends to drag down the potential of growth for the economy.
All right, let's hear from Polycarp, especially on this. And also, I want you to tell us about the next of kin regulation that was declared illegal. And we wonder what's the rhyme or reason, because I think, of course, everyone's next of kin's account should be updated regularly. You said that this particular law was sneaked in, but looking at the spirit of the law itself, isn't it for the public good at the end of the day? As you're kissing your joint, let's just hear from Polycarp on this.
Thank you. Let me address myself to the question of profits.
Please.
You know, I'm one avowed evangelist of profits. The first person who gains from profit is the government of Kenya. Government of Kenya is the biggest shareholder in every private business. For every 100 shillings of profit made in the banking sector, the first 30 is paid to the government of Kenya. So when you see a company declare profit, as a citizen, the first question to ask yourself is, does that company or business pay taxes? Because that's the first share. Then, so profitability is a good thing. It helps shared prosperity.
Yes.
Right across for second people. Then, secondly, I think the losses are bad. Losses are to be discouraged. And any CEO who's running a business that's generating losses, there are people who also generate losses deliberately to avoid taxation. So losses are not necessarily a good thing. And I think the banking industry has done very well in changing its business model under the interest rate cap regime. They've become recession-proof. You see, Chinua Achebe said, if they shoot without missing, fly without patching. That was a neck and the bud. And you've got to do that in business. You've got to reinvent yourself and figure out, okay, the environment has changed, then what do I do? And if you look at what the banks did, that is what I think has happened in the banking industry. You've seen consolidation is now starting to happen in the banking industry. I am the first one to declare that this market is no longer a place for, you can't survive as a small bank. Nigeria has 200 million people close to, it has about 11 banks. South Africa has almost 70 million people, it has 6 banks. Kenya has 50 million people, we have 43 banks. We have a bank for every community. And if you go and look at, out of the 43, profitability lies with less than 12 contribute 99% of the profit. The rest, so consolidation is starting to take place. And consolidation is good because then it means an enterprise, whether small, whether medium, whether large, can then access the facilities, and it also secures. Because what's the role of a bank? A bank moves money, a bank stores money, and a bank lends money. Only 3 things. Banks today in Kenya have only been left with primarily the job of storing money. Moving money is being done by people who are not even regulated. lending money is also being done by people who are not regulated. While banks were stopped from lending, we saw people come with balance sheets from San Francisco, from California, to lend to Kenya at almost over 1,000% interest rates. So, but banks have been able to survive in that environment. So we should celebrate banks. And on the issue of jobs, today a bank is not somewhere you go. It is something you do. Banking is being done on the phone. This device has become the bank. So increasingly, I don't think it's jobs being lost, it's jobs being changed. People are coming from basically the traditional role they used to play into something else. And perhaps there are very many people in banking in the panel today who can add to that. Let me stop there.
Right.
Maybe I'll follow from Polycarp. I think what you've picked is basically one aspect of the total realm of financial services. If you look at the profitability of the financial services in general, it's going in the same direction, all of them. And what you're seeing here is that a lot of them are redefining how they work. Look at the impact Safaricom has had on the financial services sector, right? And if you look at the amount, where they're making money, most of it is actually in quote financial services. That's where they're making money. And as Polycarp has said, the whole essence of changing the way banks work is all happening here. And if you talk about going digital, a lot of the financial services are going digital.
Yes.
And you're then going to begin to see that the financial services, because of the redefinition of how they work, they're going to begin to make money. And layoffs are happening across the whole sector. The whole of the financial services sector is beginning to trim down, redefine how it works. It means that another part of the economy in providing services to the same people will begin to grow. And I think let us not just look at just one sector in isolation, but look at the full environment. And I think you'll find that overall, the number of people, the jobs that have been created in the country is going up net, right? And all it's happening is a redistribution of the skills that we have in the country. So I think whilst, yes, the banking sector has shrunk in terms of numbers, those people have gone on to do other things elsewhere and stayed employed.
All right. And of course, so looking at this splash that we had on the front page of a Business Daily, NSE companies spent 2.7 billion shillings on staff layoffs. We have all this huge, tidy sum of money being made by the banks. We've seen that particular, of course, a figure there. But also, the banks are spending a lot of money laying off. I don't know if Geoffrey wants, I know this is really right up the alley of the banking sector, but this is in the listed. So NSE is mentioned here. Of course, I have to drag your name in it.
I wake up every morning and I see NSE, and the next text is like, integrated reporting, very effective. I think just to build on what the bankers have said, I think the capping was sort of a wake-up call to banks to really rethink their models and how they can do different kind of businesses. I think banks have gone beyond just lending now and are doing more like all financial services, from insurance to leasing to very many other options, and also looked at how they digitize and manage costs. So I think this issue of cost of the layoffs, I think is just one aspect of the whole issue around how to make the banks more efficient, and the fact that they need to really look at their cost management strategies. Well, I think these are actually situations that I think happen not only in the banking sector, but really right across, depending on how you see your business growing. I don't think it's not a very good thing when you see layoffs, but I think it's about how then you sustain the performance of the organization, and that's how banks are responding to it. It's ideally, what are we looking at? Can we grow the pie and see how we can change jobs? Some of the jobs, as Polycarp have said, have actually become redundant because with digitization. For instance, the banks who today are fully digitized, they're not tellers. You go up there, you do your own banking, you count your own money, you put it in a machine, and it's processed. So there's need for people to see how can you convert those jobs to other kind of jobs that can still provide value to the businesses. I think banks should also see how they can redefine the roles of the staff as opposed to layoffs. But I think these circumstances sometimes are inevitable, and they have to adapt them. But I really can't speak much of why they continue to do this. But it's really, in my view, part of just an intervention to sustain performance.
Right. Kiprono, you want to weigh on this briefly?
Let me just say that I also, like Polycarp, agree that profit is a good thing, and profit is a sibling of prosperity. And you see, we cannot have a prosperous economy if we don't have profits. And, you know, if we look at the interest rate cap, you know, one of the unintended consequences was denying credit to the SME sector. And the SME sector in Kenya has actually not grown. And you can even see that the casualty rate of SMEs has been very high over the last few years. So I think it's a good thing that banks are making profit. But what we would like to see is an economy where not just the banks, I mean, we want to see a very vibrant retail sector, a vibrant manufacturing sector, tourism doing well. We want to see mining. We want to see oil and gas. We want to see real estate, all the sectors doing well. You know, I remember the time when the president assented to the interest rate capping bill. I think if we remember, at that time in the country, actually the public was baying for the blood of the banks. And the reason for that is that there was the perception that the banks had become increasingly greedy. And the rush for profit was their prime motivation. But I think really I support now that the interest rate cap should be lifted. But at the same time, the banks should themselves be responsible in making sure that their charges, the interest that they charge, is commensurate to the state of the economy, that there is a benefit for them as there is a benefit for their customers. We need to see a more fluid market with more liquidity around. And we'd like to also see that the banks themselves, in the ownership structure of the banks, that more shares are floated on the NSE. Let's share the prosperity in a broader sense. And the other thing that I think is really absolutely imperative, and I think I've spoken many times on this as a chair of the chamber in the last few years, is the government's appetite to borrow from local banks should reduce. And the government needs to seek alternative means to fund particularly long-term projects. And that way, they will leave some amount of money available in the banks in order for them to lend to the smaller businesses in order for shared prosperity.
Right. Let me weigh in on that and add, because Kip raises a very good point. I think government policy should always have the underlying intention to equalize opportunity for citizens to prosper. But if you look at the interest rate cap, it was not about equalizing opportunity. The interest rate cap, if you look at the underlying intent, it was to guarantee an outcome for the citizen. And policies that guarantee outcome for the citizens tend to be socialistic. But what we should do with the cap, in my view, is the citizen out there is saying banks can't be left on their own. There must be regulation because banks can exploit the citizen. We are saying, okay, fine. But you narrowed it too narrowly. Let's give a solution. Let's think about, rather than it be CBR plus 3, make it CBR plus 10 so that it gives the ability to price risk. Because how are you lent money? The only reason you lent money is, are you who you are? Do you have the ability to pay? And do you have the character to pay? And the character counts for a lot more than anything. When you put an interest rate cap, it's a nation saying we can vouch for the character of our citizens to pay their loans. And we're saying, wait, give a spectrum. At the same time, I think we as bankers have to be logical, back to what Kip is saying, and actually say, when the cap is lifted, or once the cap is lifted, we need to consider not changing interest rate pricing on existing loan contracts, and maybe do that at anniversary based on how they are performing. Those are the concessions we are prepared to do, and I know Habil is leading us to have a conversation with parliamentarians on this subject. I think reason now needs to come to the table, because since the interest rate cap, lending to private sector has dropped from 20% to less than 2%. It has now inched up back to 4%. And lending, money in an economy is created by commercial banks. That is a fact, because every loan is a deposit. And it is the oxygen of business, and especially lending, working capital lending to small, medium enterprises. That conversation needs to be held, and held very quickly. And I think we are at a point where we've seen the Minister of Finance has presented it in his finance bill. We in Kenya, bankers led by our leader Habil, we are looking at it and considering it. And the day it gets lifted, then business will start to flow.
I think just very briefly, I completely agree with Polycarp. I mean, if we had that sort of a regime, I think as a nation we'll start to move ahead. Right. And we as a chamber, actually, when I was in the chamber, we supported very much risk-based lending. I mean, banks should be able to lend on the basis of who your risk, what your risk is.
Right. Sorry to butt in. We have to get a snippet of what is happening currently. We'll just get back to the conversation where the Cabinet Secretary of Education, that is Magoha, is launching a task force that will be streamlining the CBC, that is the competence-based curriculum that has, of course, been in the public domain, a very ticklish issue right now. We just want to get a snippet of it, then we'll get back to the discussion much later. Let's just take it right now.
You're not a member of NAT? Why not? I was assuming that all teachers belong to NAT, so it's not so. What about Kahindi Mule? Are you a member of Kupet? Because the impression I get from where I stand is that all teachers belong to union. So it is not so. No, sir. Oh, I see. It's very fresh. It's very refreshing, isn't it? Huh? It is a good challenge. So it is by choice. Very good. So the person we want is the teacher, because the constant is the child, isn't it? The person we want is the teacher, and the constant is the child. And the role of the parents, as you have seen here, Mr. Mayo, who has been working very well with us, this is now going to allow you to talk to your child as the child is training, isn't it? I also want to recognize and thank the role played by private schools, represented here by Leo Kasanga. It is important because the government's position is that there is no private child and there is no public child. There is a Kenyan child, and we shall serve that child without fear or favor. Let me just warn you as I close that this is going to be a challenging task, because as we move along, we have to keep on investing both our brain power, human resource capacity, and finances. And I would want you to remember the child. Anytime you have doubts in your mind, remember that child that is somewhere in the gutter, without a parent and without anybody to help except you yourself. If we ring-fence that child, everybody else will come on board. And if you take that going forward, then you shall succeed. Because nobody is saying everything is going to be perfect, but I think it is something that the government is going to manage through you. And finally, just to wish you well, and Professor Fatuma Chege, I think you have been, you are a deputy headmaster now. I've been headmaster for 10 years, and it is the same thing, except for us at the top, me and Chege, we don't have a difficult job. The ones who have a difficult job are the ones dealing with the smaller children. That's what I found out. Do you get the point? So greater honor should go to you. Professor Chege, I want to tell you that I'm not the type who can be forced to support something I don't believe in. And you can take that to the bank. I'm also not the type who you give reports and then I say, oh, thank you very much. I go to where the rubber touches the road. So I've been to the field, and I would encourage you occasionally to go and see yourself that this is actually working. I was at Inea County. I've been to Kwale, I've been to Vihiga, I've been to Moiben, I've been to many places, and most of the times I go without announcing that I'm going. And you find our gallant teachers teaching this in grades 1 to 3. So the challenge I'm giving you is to show me where we are going between from that grade 3 to the university. Okay? May I now inaugurate this task force and wish you all the best and give you the documents which we have up to now. We have also decided on the date without your approval because time was short, we have decided that the 16th of August will be the national conference, which everybody is invited to.
Thank you very much.
Professor Magoha there presiding over the inaugural meeting of the task force for enhancing access, retention, transition, equity, and quality for effective curriculum reform and implementation of the Kenya Institute for Curriculum Development. And of course, that task force has been launched right now. We eagerly wait to see how this will be shaking into place, because we know the CBC has been very controversial. And you've heard him also saying there with his Tang family in Chic about also members of the Kupet or maybe of NAT who have been agitating, especially NAT, who have been agitating against the shaking into place of a CBC right now. So we're yet to see how this will shake into place. And now that this task force has been launched, we'll be keeping our eyes peeled and keeping out our ears to hear what will be happening on the ground. Of course, we shall be relaying that to you as well. Well, we want to wind up with our panelists this morning, and we've been looking at the state of economy. And briefly, before we had that particular, that particular insight from the CS and the launching of the task force, we were talking about the banking sector. And the question that I'd actually put to Habil Olaka is of a next of kin regulation, which was pronounced an illegality by the courts recently. But the question is, Habil, banking or bankers are arguing that the next of kin regulation was sneaked in, and it was not actually in the amendment bill itself. But looking at the public interest, isn't it good for the public interest? Why are you actually against this particular next of kin regulation?
Yeah, I think you get it right in the sense that the way the amendment was, for lack of a better word, sneaked in, it came in after the second reading of the bill, which means that the departmental committee that is assigned that specific bill had already done its bit, which is the involvement of the public in crafting the bill. So the amendment comes on the floor of the House. Public does not have a chance to participate in it, and therefore it's passed in the format in which it is. Now, and you have seen this has become almost like a trend. A number of laws are passed in that nature, and many of them do not stand the test of conformity to the Constitution. And this particular one was actually because of that, in the sense that one, there had been no public participation, but also, what was it meant to be achieving? If you look at the proposal in the bill was the fact, and the discussion on the floor of the House was the fact that a number of people pass on with accounts in the banks, and the balances in the accounts are not reunited with their survivors. Now, in Kenya, we have got succession law. Succession law guides what would happen in the event of that happening, in which case there is a whole process of appointing administrators to the estate of the deceased, who then the bank is obligated to release the funds to. Whether you have got the next of kin details or not in your books, that will not be the determining factor. It will be under the succession law. So banks are being forced to maintain details that are not useful for the purpose for which it was intended. And not even beyond that, there is the fact that there is a penalty that has been prescribed in the law, which is 1 million shillings for every account in default. Most accounts, in fact, I think about 95% of the balances rarely go beyond 100,000. So for every account in default, you're being penalized 1 million shillings for balances that rarely go beyond 100,000. There is no fairness there. So I think the critical thing is the fact that the banks felt aggrieved by the fact that there was a penalty that was being imposed on a law that is not effective in achieving the purpose for which it was intended. Okay. And so we had to go to court for arbitration.
Okay, right. Let's just give also our closing remarks as this morning. We begin with Patrick Obath because of interest of time. What will be your headline thoughts? Are you going also for the memorial service this morning?
Yes, I'll be going for the memorial service. I think we need to celebrate the life of a significant person in Kenya. I think that's all I'd say. Somebody who was who has basically, I think, set the standard for all of us as leaders in this country to emulate. And if we just take a small amount of what he has done individually, I think we can all begin to make a big change in this country.
Thank you. Jeff?
I think Bob's legacy is really showing how running transparent businesses can be highly successful. Today, Safaricom is one of the largest companies on the exchange, commanding over 40% of our market cap, and running a very good business, not only for profit, but for really corporate prosperity. And I want to encourage all companies in the private sector to look at the NSC as a very attractive option. There's tax amnesties which have been put in place. There are tax incentives in place. And just to encourage them to bring companies like this and also run transparent businesses that can really address the issues around shared value.
Right, and of course we didn't have even time to talk about the derivatives, the new product that you do have as well. Next time we'll do that.
Commencing today.
Commencing today.
It, yeah.
Thank you. Polycarp, your headline thoughts, please.
I think we are all heading off to celebrate a great life, a life that proved to us that an individual can really move the needle in terms of availing opportunities for millions and millions of people. Bob was a great believer in, here's the opportunity for you, exploit the opportunity, I've presented it to you. And he was a great believer in effort, that opportunity is converted to outcome by individual effort with integrity. And we thank him, and once again, sincere condolences to the entire Safaricom family and to his own family. He's a man we shall miss, and a friend we are all going to miss for a long time.
Thank you. Right, finally, Kiprono.
Yeah, Debarl, I think for me, you know, there is no doubt that Bob's life is a manifestation of success, and the fact that he impacted on much more than corporate life. Bob left huge footprints in the sands of time, and he really made a huge impact on this country. Bob, like many people are not aware of, was actually Kenyan. He acquired Kenyan citizenship, so I would say that Kenya has lost a great Kenyan. And he actually deliberately, I think you listened to what the Boys Club said last night, Bob actually purposed to end his life in Kenya. I mean, he could have been flown out to London, he could have flown to India, but he was so patriotic and he loved our country. And to Wamboi and to her children, to his son and daughter in the United Kingdom, his former wife, I really would like to extend my heartfelt and sincere condolence. And I think Bob's life really is a big challenge to our political leadership. I mean, he did prove that it is possible to lead and walk and lead by example and really practice what you preach.
Right. Kiprono Kitoni, the Vice Chair, World Chamber Federation and Chairman, Radio Africa Group, thank you for coming through. Also, Polycarp Igathe, who is the General Manager, Equity Bank, thank you for coming through. The CEO of Kenya Bankers Association, Dr. Habil Olaka, thank you for coming through this morning. And Jeff Odundo, who is the CEO of Nairobi Securities Exchange, thank you also for coming through. Patrick Obath, who is Managing Partner at the Adam Smith International, also the Vice Chair of KEPSA Foundation, and also the Director of Board of Directors there at Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you for coming through this morning as well. We really do appreciate you for that cogent discussion we've had on the state of economy. Of course, time is not really on our side, but I can just run you by as we're winding up also the program, how it looks this morning. This is the memorial service for Bob Collymore that will be happening at the All Saints Cathedral, and it will begin at 9 a.m. That's when the cathedral opens, and all guests will be seated by 10:30. And of course, also addressing this particular occasion will be His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. We shall be also beaming that live for you from All Saints Cathedral here on NTV. So keep your eyes peeled and keep out your ears, as I mentioned earlier, for that developing story. Thank you for your valued company. My name is Debarl.